we've touched on it. We've mentioned Charlie McAvoy being injured and being out. The news came out that he ended up having to go to the hospital. It went from an upper body injury to an infection. Now we find out earlier as well that he is not only still in the hospital, but that they're still monitoring everything. How is this going to impact the Boston Bruins immediately coming out of this break, coming out of Four Nations that's now been 2 weeks long?
Yeah, the word that scares me the most is infection. You're talking to somebody that had 10 major operations when he played, and, I was susceptible to infection. And that stuff keeps you in the hospital for a long time. That's the stuff that is dangerous. It's fatal at times. So you have to be really careful when you hear that word infection. And that's concerning. So, you want the best for Charlie. You certainly want him back on the ice because he's critical to the Bruins and any level of success that they're going to attain before this year is over. But he needs to get healthy. It's first and foremost. So that being said, you are so excited or anticipatory of what are the Bruins going to look like, the games leading up to the trade deadline, which path are they going to take based on the comments we've gotten from both the president and the general manager. Are they going to be sellers? Or do they feel like all we need to do is get into the dance, get into the tournament, and we can do some damage because we're going to get our other top defenseman back and Hampus Lindholm. We'll have McAvoy. We'll have something to prove. We know we haven't played up to our capabilities. We're letting down the Bruins organization as well as the fan base because we're not putting up wins. The last two games before the break were very disturbing because you had leads after two periods. You don't even get the games to overtime because loser points are critical right now if you're thinking about climbing back into the postseason mix. So the McAvoy situation has me very, very concerned about what this team's going to look like. That being said, you look at all the underlying numbers, and they're not great. They're not great. The numbers that really generally coincide with playoff teams aren't there for the Bruins. And then when you start looking at the core group, the strength down the middle, Zacha and Lindholm are really good players, but are they a 1-2 center combination? Charlie Coyle had a phenomenal playoff in 2019 because he was a third-line center. He gave you mismatches. He gave you dominance in those situations. That's when you know you have a good team. That's when you know you have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. So the things that you get a little concerned about, the goaltending, Swayman, at times he looked like he was getting back to form that he had last year in the postseason. He looked like that number one guy, that $9 million goaltender. And then, you get a little leaky or you give up some goals where you say needed a save there, even though it was a difficult save that was required. So goaltending, team defense, lack of top two defensemen available to you on your roster. Are you strong enough down the middle? Do you have young, exciting, fast, skilled talent enough to support in a third and fourth line situation? All those things have the Bruins fans concerned when you think about what's going to happen between now and March 7th. And the needle all seems to be pointing to, especially with the McAvoy situation now, seems to be leaning towards, I think we need to start selling assets in order to retool for the future. You don't want to give up on this season. You certainly don't want to give up trying to make the playoffs. And sometimes when you sell, the other guys seem to step up. Sometimes when you make a coaching change, and we saw this earlier this year, and we're seeing it in places around the league where you get this great, bounce back. What's happening in Detroit now? They're putting pressure on Boston, mostly because of the coaching change. So when things happen that are that dramatic and you can find ways to win hockey games, that would be the best situation. If you're a seller, yet you continue to win games, even though you're moving assets in order to improve your team down the line, in order to get more talented, more faster, more quicker, more talented, all of that stuff. So that's what it seems to me, Kasey, that the direction of this team is heading. And if you were on the fence, I think the McAvoy situation is kind of tilting you in the other direction.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a good point with the sellers and just kind of some of the things that the team might be looking to do, because where they're sitting numerically, they need something that's going to generate a spark. Like they're just kind of sitting very much like in the middle of the pack, middle of play right now. They enter right now coming out of Four Nations, 10th in the Eastern Conference. They're doing a fun dance with the Blue Jackets, both sitting at 60 points and looking through the window to try to tap on the door to get into the wild card spot, or get back into the wild card spot, I should say. Point variation, not too bad. A game or two in hand could be the biggest question mark here, but let's break it down by group, because I like that you mentioned Swayman, Brick. 2 weeks off for a goalie, not particularly ideal. Not that he's been off. He's been practicing with Team USA, but I know that when I've sat down and talked with Vasilevsky he's the kind of player who he wants to get those reps in, that anytime his team limits how many shots are coming at him is when he feels like his play gets stale. So how is this going to be impacted when the Bruins return, McAvoy out, some change up on the back end, and now you got Swayman who has to come in and really stand on his head to get this team into a postseason?
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I'm glad he's been on the ice. I'm glad he's been in practices with the best players in the game. I'm glad he's been taking his reps in that situation, and he knows he has to approach practice as a backup goaltender, meaning, these are my games. I have to have practice as game situations in my mind, how I prep in case I get an opportunity to play in this tournament, but looking forward to when he gets back to Boston because he's going to use this as a reset. And I know during the year, you looked ahead and you look at certain breaks during the regular season, and sometimes you look forward to them in order to get that rest, clear your mind, get away from the game. But in this situation, I think he needed to be on the ice. I think he needed to get the reps while he's doing the reset in order to get ready. He knows what's on his shoulders in terms of responsibility. And if you look at the Bruins' schedule, he has a chance to play the majority of the games, certainly, before the trade deadline, and certainly before the end of the regular season, and especially if he gets hot. We know what a hot goaltender can do. It can carry a team. It can get you into the postseason. It can give your team believability. It can make you better than you think you actually are. It can supplement a lack of offense. When I said the numbers are concerning when you talk about the Bruins and how they playoff team, their road record, their special teams, the amount of penalties that they take, all that stuff, the goal differential, points that they've left on the table. All those things say this is not a playoff team based on the numbers. But if you have a goaltender that can do a reset, come in, play to his utmost capability, now you start to believe that, the Bruins do have good players. They do have enough depth. They have a guy named David Pastrnak who's having a spectacular, second half of the first 60% of the 70% of the season. It was a little slow out of the gate for him in terms of his level of play and his expectation. But, right before the break, the guy was on a roll. He was on a heater. So when you have that and you have leadership and you have good culture in the room and you have a goaltender, now you start to say, we can do this. We can do this. Even if we have to sell some parts that are pending UFAs, we don't see it happening. We need to go in another direction, but keep our core together. Hopefully McAvoy gets a nice recovery, speedy recovery, gets back in the lineup. You get Lindholm back. Now it's a different looking team and a different a belief that you can get the job done. And maybe that's the direction it goes. And I think that's all predicated on Swayman coming out of this Four Nations on top of his game.
Yeah, I'm sure that he's going to know how much it's going to mean for him to come out and be just as sharp. But when you don't play and you get to practice with the best, I feel like you're going to be that much more hype to get back together with your team and perform for your team. You mentioned Pastrnak. Obviously, he was on a point heater. He was getting the job done. He's sitting at north of 60 points for his team, almost sitting at over, 1.3 point per matchup for any team. Can he pick up where he left off after this break? Because he was at the game the other night versus Sweden. I felt like he had that itch to be back on the ice. He's like, whatever team wins, but, I'm excited for this and what it's meant to the other players. So can he pick things back up?
Yeah, I think he was pretty disappointed that he wasn't part of this, this NHL-sanctioned event, the fact that it was Four Nations and, he's not from one of those Four Nations. And I think that was a little bothersome to him. I didn't have a conversation with him about it. I can't say that for certain, but I got to believe, especially when you're the hottest guy in the NHL and now the NHL's on center stage and you're not part of it, that's got to be a little disheartening. So, I think it's just going to fuel the fire. I think it's going to be, part of that. He knows what he's doing. He knows how successful he can be. He's grown as a player, his ability to create offense, his ability to make plays when teams overplay him, his ability to move the puck, I think has grown exponentially in his game. He has more assists than he does goals in his career. It tells you a little something. They're not all rebounds, So I think he has individual goals. I think he thinks he's, part of this leadership group that he can give more. He can help Marchand in the room a little bit more, but he can certainly help on the ice by playing and leading by example, and that has not always been his strength, high risk taker, turnover machine at times, as are a lot of the top offensive guys in the league, because you give them more rope, you give them more latitude, you give them an opportunity to make those high danger plays, because when they make them, it's pretty unique stuff and it's entertaining and it helps you win a lot of hockey games. So But I think coming out of this break, the fact that he wasn't involved, the fact that he knows what he wants to do, the fact that he was on a heater going into it, I think he has every opportunity to pick up right where he left off.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like he's so humble, but every interview you just again you see that spark in his eye. You kind of see that chip on his shoulder, like what he would have accomplished if he was able to participate. I feel like that fire is about to return as the Bruins get back in play, starting with the Ducks on Saturday. Now, Marchand and Lindholm, a part of Four Nations, obviously. Elias Lindholm, before the break, 29 points in 57 games. But then you've got Brad Marchand sitting at 44 points in 57 games. I feel like Brad Marchand's going to come into this feeling good. I mean, you get to play in the championship. He looks like he's been having such a time with Team Canada. But how do you think playing these 2 weeks, the level of compete, the intensity, the fun, everything that's been encompassed in Four Nations, now you got to get back to the grind of the Bruins. How do you think these two are kind of pull on that to be a spark for their team?
Well, starting with Lindholm, you look at Team Sweden, they didn't lose. I don't think they lost a game in regulation, right? They lost 2 in overtime and they won. So, he was in a situation, given the talent level on that team and where he was slotted, he was more of a third or fourth line guy, played center, was asked to do, more of the defensive part of the game. They weren't looking for him to be a bumper on the power play. And all that changes when he comes back to Boston. He's a $7+ million a year guy. The numbers haven't been there. The production hasn't been there. So the pressure's been there because of the expectation. But again, a chance for the reset, a refocus. I think he really enjoyed playing for his country and playing with the other fellow Swede players. And now he gets a chance to come back and almost say, you didn't make a mistake by giving me the contract that you gave me. I am going to add to all the little things that I do well. I'm still going to be strong in the face-off circle. I'm still going to make good offensive plays. I am going to be that strength down the middle guy. I'm going to get the job done. I'm going to make my wingers better. And I'm not going to be a third line guy. I'm going to be a top 6 guy, and I'm going to produce. And I think the experience of playing in this best on best reminds him, if he needed it, it reminds him of just how good of a player he is. And my expectation is that it should be beneficial for him individually coming out of the break. As far as Brad Marchand goes, I just love the way this kid approaches this whole Four Nations. He's eating it up. He's soaking it all in. He's loving being a part of Canada, regardless if he plays 5 minutes a night or 15 minutes a night or 20 minutes a night. He wants to be a part of a winning culture, and he brings that leadership and his unique approach to the leadership quotient into that room, and that room's full of leaders. And I think that a chance to step away from the pressures that have been on his shoulders all year long as that next guy, the guy that, Chara passed the torch to Bergeron, passed it to Marchand, and the pressure that goes with that, the responsibility that goes with that, especially a guy that has such a checkered past when it comes to walking the line and playing the game the right way. So I think getting away from the pressures of being, the leader of the Bruins, a Bruins team that's underperformed. Again, I'm maybe this is rose-colored glasses, but I think it benefits him as a player as well. And I think to be able to be on the ice with the best players from Team Canada, their ability to make plays, move pucks, play the game fast, play it quick, play it at a high level will only benefit him as well, because there have been times this year where then that's been a struggle for him, and a lot of that goes back to the last offseason and his inability to train, and you can't catch up during the regular season because it's just not possible. So maybe this experience helps accelerate that part of his game moving forward.
Yeah, I think that Marchand had himself a number of fans, new fans that just fell in love with like the character that he is, how the room responds to him. I love the videos of him going in the locker room and like his little things that he says to Jack Hughes and giving Sidney Crosby heat for, being a great player and stuff. So I feel like a lot of people are starting to gravitate towards Marchand and probably going to look forward to what he's going to bring back to the ice for the Bruins. Now, you mentioned the trade deadline coming up and how they're probably should approach this. Are there any names in mind? This doesn't have to be per, conversations or anything that you've heard, but like anything that jumps out to you that's like, this guy would be, a fun fit or probably a good spark in Boston?
Yeah, the names that I'm interested in, Kasey, are more tailor-made for an off season, a summertime, June draft kind of blockbuster trade. I think back to when the Bruins were going to trade one of their goaltenders, and you knew it was going to be Ullmark. And here's a Vezina, goalie resume guy. Had a 40-win season, all-time, record for the Bruins in one season, and just a terrific goalie. And can you afford the tandem? Can you pay both those guys the money that's commensurate with their abilities at that one position. And obviously the Bruins said we can't do it. We're going to roll with Swayman. So they're going to deal Ullmark. And, I thought maybe you were looking at a blockbuster deal where it was multiple players, but it's so hard to make those deals in this league because of the no trade, no movement, salary cap. And the deal was made. The Bruins, it looked like they wanted to get in the first round of the draft and in that summer. And then, the deal that Ottawa made was, well, you're going to take a goaltender back, and that's how they get Korpisalo, and then the money issue. So I thought there was a potential there for a big trade. I think there's potential for a big trade this offseason if that's the direction the Bruins think they need to go, or feel that it's a must and it's best for the organization. That's above my pay grade. That's for the other guys to determine. But when I look at this team, you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. No more Bergeron, no more Krejci. Who's going to be that centerman that's going to be a number one guy that can play in every situation, be one of the best players in the game, distribute the puck, get the most out of Pastrnak or whoever his wingers are. And I don't think they're there. So that's what I'd be looking for, and that doesn't pertain to a trading deadline deal. That's not how it happens. I look more at the Bruins for a trading deadline is, the UFAs, and are those guys part of our future? What are we willing to pay them? The good news is the cap has really strengthened. Kudos to the NHL. Going all the way back to the pandemic, and to keep the salary cap flat when it should have reduced during that time. When we had no spectators in the stands. They were able to keep it a flat and to survive because there were plenty of guys with multi-year deals, with multi-million-dollar salaries, term and money that they had to make work. And now look where the league is at. And the Four Nations, I think, is a great example, going back to a little bit of surprise for me. Going back to the Four Nations, how successful it's been and the hold that it has on the sports community right now, the ideal final that they get, and you combine that with the fact that they're going back to the Olympics, you're going to have a World Cup, and the salary cap is jumping. It is jumping, and I think that's all good news. So that's where the Bruins got to figure out the nickels and dimes, what works, how do they project, who's part of our future, who's not, what do we deal at the deadline, and in order to get assets, they don't have a lot of draft capital, that is attractive to other groups. So that means you have to look at existing players if you're going to be in that trade market.